Welcome back. What a day today's been. Very eventful, covered a lot of ground. Today's mission was pretty much just to go and find some new grounds. We don't often get the water as clear as it was, or clear as it has been for the last few days. It's sort of like a once in a blue moon, once a year kind of occurrence. So naturally, Nelson Diver's got to make the most of it. The water's been pretty busy and there's been a lot of people out there. Huge variety of fish seen today, and also some other specimens which you will see soon. I'll do a bit of a debrief yarn, and I'll probably cut the yarn in between video segments so it sort of splits it up a bit so it's not so boring, and just so I can give some sort of explanation as to what's going on, because I can't talk underwater. And yeah, as usual, if you like it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hope you enjoy the footage. The first few drops were pretty uneventful, and we kept on moving around. We both had kayaks, so it was relatively easy to move spots once we'd made that decision, and we could cover a lot of ground fast. Water was super clear, man, like 12 meters probably in some of the good spots, but pretty patchy, and in some areas there was like a thermocline at about 8 meters, and the viz dropped away to like 2 or 3, and it got really cold down there. So yeah, some spots are better than others, but we still managed to find some areas holding some good fish and put some food on the table. First fish landed for me was tarakihi. So these guys are sort of 15 to 20 meters usually, schooling fish, and once they reach sort of between 25 and 30 centimeters, they actually move off to deeper reefs. So us spearos usually only find them, there are some exceptions, but we usually only find them between 25 and 30 centimeters. These guys are all about 28, so relatively small but super delicious, and there's a lot of them out there. There's big schools of them, so I was pretty selective on which ones I took, and I made sure there was heaps left to sustain that population. once I sort of picked off a few tarakihi, I decided I'd give those guys a rest. I had enough of them, and focus on something else. And we popped over onto our next pin, and on the current wood side, so if you say you've got a rock like this and the current's running this way, it will rush over the top of the rock, and there'll be an eddy at the top of the rock, which is what you call a pressure point, and you can use that to your advantage to allow you to keep diving down that side of the rock without getting sucked away in the current. So it's just a bit of where the water swirls a bit, and you can hang around there with less effort. There's still effort involved, but it's less effort as opposed to if you were somewhere else in that vicinity. So we were dropping down that pressure point, and when it flattened out on the sea floor, probably around, I don't know, 15 meters, there were schools of fish hanging out there. So I decided to pick off a few butterfly perch. They are, I refer to them as the South Island pink mammal. We don't get pink mammal down here. They're sort of a Bay of Plenty up species, sort of far north of the North Island, and they're sort of like a deep reef schooling fish, and very delicate white flesh, and really similar eating to these butterfly perch, and similar sort of habitat too. Hence why I have that correlation between the two species. So I knocked off a few of those. They're pretty easy to shoot. They're not too timid. Once again, they don't get too big. That's probably the biggest you'll find them, 30 centimeters. But pretty tasty. Once you work out how to fillet them, they've got a strange bone structure. But yeah, they're really delicious. After that, we decided to move on again and came across a school of kahawai. Hung around with those guys for a while, hoping that a kingfish would come through. Didn't eventuate, so I ended up popping one, and just so you can have a bit of sashimi, because kahawai sashimi's top notch. So they actually hung around for a while after I shot that one, and sort of followed me as I was working my way further up the coast. After that, we got onto, I came across a really fishy area. It was sort of like not an area you'd expect to be too fishy. It was just low-lying boulder, foul, not much current, but for some reason there was a whole bunch of snapper, trevally, tarakihi, and my mate saw a couple of blue mulky. I didn't see those guys, but saw everything else. So hung around those for a while, cracked open a few kinner, in the hopes of a bigger snapper, but didn't really eventuate. So I just spent some time enjoying their presence. And it was just really good to see so many snapper in that year class that will, in a few years, recruit into the fishery and help sustain the population and help put food on the table for fishers and divers. So it was really good to see. After that, we came across a patch of greenlet mussels on the top of one of the rocks, and we love greenlet mussels, and the kids just absolutely love them. It's probably one of their favourites. So I was helping myself to a feed of those. They're super clean, no fouling on them or anything. So really good eating, and Mrs. said they were probably some of the best mussels she's ever had. So I'm glad I spent the time to dig those out. After that, I could sort of hear some squeaking in the background, but I thought it was just my ears, or I don't know. I just kind of ignored it, didn't take too much notice of it. And then about 10 minutes later, my mate gave me a couple of yells, and there's a whole pod of dolphins come through. It was probably, I don't know, maybe close to 100, really spread out, and they were the large bottlenose dolphins. So I've only swam with bottlenose dolphins once before, and it was a really poor viz, so it was actually quite scary. But obviously, as you'll see, the viz was good enough to enjoy this experience, and they were just super playful, man. We played with them for a good 15 minutes, and it was real cool. So really good experience. That's epic. They're shitting everywhere, eh? Well, back to the spearfishing, eh? And pretty much after that, we decided that we'd start making our way back and swim back through that school of snapper to see if anything had come in on that Kinnaburley. So we started swimming around the point, and I was ahead of my mate. He was a bit behind me, and I got back to the school of snapper, started doing some drops on them, checking them out, and didn't realise at the time, but he was actually calling me over. I couldn't hear him. He had a kingfish on, so he saw about a dozen came through. He nailed one, and due to the increased shark encounters that have been going on around Nelson lately, he sort of had that in the back of his mind and put heaps of pressure on this fish and just skull dragged it in. He got within like an arm's reach of it and it tore off and got away. So he was gutted about that. I was gutted that I wasn't there to nail one too, and also gutted that I could have probably put a second shot in his fish and we could have landed it. So we were pretty gutted about that, but we kept on moving anyway. We decided to vacate that area because of the sharks, and obviously there's a relatively dead fish in the water with lots of blood. So we moved on and came back to another pin where we were shooting some tarakihi previously and did a few drops on that. I had this feeling that something was about to happen. Like you divers might get the feeling too, but you just have this like really strange gut feeling that, you know, yep, this drop is going to be a good one. You get this sort of, I don't know, sixth sense, I guess, in a way. So I had this feeling, grabbed my bigger gun off the kayak, loaded the rubbers, turned the camera on and did a drop, and it had cleared up a bit. When we were at this spot previously, it was actually quite murky down below, but the current was pumping, like absolutely ripping. Once again, I was using that pressure point to my advantage. So I was just sitting there and did some drops, and on this one drop, dropped down, sitting against the rock, and did a few grunts, and then boom, round the corner came about, I don't know, I'll see it when I play the footage, edit the footage, but probably just under a dozen kingfish came around the corner. Yeah, they all looked about the same size, so I picked the closest one and nailed him. Really good holding shot, but because he was so close, the spear went all the way through, and he was actually on the mono at that time, so he went for a big run, and I was trying not to put too much pressure on him when he was on that mono because it just slices through them like no man's business. So by the time he'd gone for his initial run and started to gain some line and get another look at him, he'd already opened up quite a big wound where the spear had gone through. And I managed to get him back onto the spear, back onto the flopper, and started to put some more pressure on, and he was trying to rub me off on the reef. So it was a pretty hard fight. He had a lot of go in him, and there was a hell of a lot of current pumping over that rock. So I was getting dragged around and trying to get him in as fast as I could. So I got sucked over the back of the rock and then into the current, so I started fair moving, and then boom, out comes this bronzy out from the bottom right of the camera. And he wasn't too lively at first, just started sniffing around, but I just noticed the hole opening up on the kingfish at the time, so it was like, oh, I couldn't really just drag him in because it would have pulled the spear, and I didn't want to leave him down there because the shark would have a go at him. So I was just like, you know, screw it, I don't want the shark grabbing the fish. I'm going to put the pressure on, and if it rips off, so be it. So I started putting the pressure on. As I started working a bit harder, the fish started getting a bit more lively as well, and trying to get away, and it just excited the shark, and you can see it in the video. First, when he comes in, he's just cruising. Then as soon as I put the pressure on, the fish starts thrashing, the shark just lights up and starts going for it. And honestly, like, you look at the video, the shark wasn't actually that much bigger than the fish, man, and he had trouble like getting it in its mouth. It was quite a big kingfish. So super greedy, super hungry shark. So you got to be careful out there, you divers, because they're out there feeding, they're out there doing their thing. So yeah, he was being pretty greedy. He was struggling to get the fish in his mouth, but I kept fighting it anyway. And then once that shark lit up and he just went for it, the kingfish started thrashing. One last pull and it managed to rip off the spear. So I was super gutted about that, because this was the last day of good viz. We've got a big storm coming through, so it was my last chance to get a kingfish for a while. So absolutely gutted, but on the plus, I'm glad the shark didn't get it, because they learn that behavior. And you look at some of the footage from Spearos up north, they really have learned to use divers as a means of getting a free or easy feed. So I'm glad the shark didn't get it, but he still ruined that opportunity, unfortunately. But also, once that fish got away, the shark decided that it was still a bit feisty and decided to come for me. Because I was on the surface, the footage isn't that good. The camera was dipping in and out of the water, but he came for me about 3 or 4 times. And obviously my gun was unloaded because I just had that fish on. So I ended up just giving him a few jabs with the butt of the gun. And luckily that was enough to deter him after a while, and he swam away. At that point I thought he'd swam away, but 2 minutes later he had actually crept up behind me again. So just to put it out there, like, stay aware, you know, don't just assume they're gone because the fish is gone. They're hungry, they're feeding, and if they associate you with a free feed, then so be it, they're going to follow you around. So I swam into the shallows after that, decided what I was going to do and reloaded the gun. Thought I'd go for a few more drops on the way around the point, but I sort of come to the conclusion at that point that that was it for kingfish that day. I really didn't want to feed that shark any more fish, because I don't want them learning that. I can see it becoming a real problem for spearfishermen in the future, with bronzies and other aggressive sharks that may want a free feed. So yeah, I do encourage divers not to just go and feed the sharks, because it's not the right thing to do. They'll learn just similar to how a seagull hangs around the bins at KFC. You know, they're there for clean up their scraps and have an easy feed. So they're not dumb, they'll learn. So yeah, please don't go feeding sharks, even though it might be fun. It's not a wise move in the long run. But anyway, I did a few more drops after that, and then decided to call it a day and head back in. But yeah, so that was the dive. Pretty eventful, super fun. Days like that, you really appreciate diving. It's honestly, as I said before, it's not often we get these conditions here in Nelson, and us Nelson divers, people watching, you probably know how hard we have to work for a feed compared to some of the places around the rest of the country. So we do, and I do, really appreciate these days that we get when it's clear and glassy and great conditions for diving. It really does solidifies it, you know. It really makes you realize, you know, why you do it and why we love the water so much. It's just amazing. I really didn't want to get out the water, but Anyway, hope you like this. I'm going to go and process some fish and probably have some sashimi with the kids. So once again, thanks for watching. See you next time.